Welcome to High Growth Matters, an open comp podcast for influential players in the pre-IPO ecosystem. This show shares insider knowledge about building a badass business, and the expert conversation you're about to hear will cover everything you need to know about hiring and retention, fundraising, leadership, diversity, and more. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the High Growth Matters podcast sponsored by OpenComp. I am one of your co-hosts, the VP of Marketing at OpenComp, Caitlin Allen. And today we are going to talk to an expert in something that many of us care about. As you all know, executives significantly influence how quickly companies can thrive or fail. So much so that independent surveys from both Stanford and Harvard, each of nearly 900 venture capitalists, have revealed that executives contribute more to a startup's success or failure than even the product itself. So in this conversation, I am talking to Kate Bullis of SEBA Executive Search, which many know in Silicon Valley and beyond as the go-to executive search firm, and Kate leads the marketing and revenue practice. And together we are going to dive into many things, including common misconceptions that disrupt the executive search process and how to design a mecca-like experience for all parties involved, whether you're hiring an external firm or leading the search internally. Kate, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy.
It is. So let's kick it off with a question we ask everybody. We'd love to hear one or two things that most of your clients or coworkers don't know about you.
I don't know about most, but many of my clients don't know that I'm an identical twin. So that's always an interesting little, something interesting to talk about. There's someone who looks almost exactly like me on the opposite coast. So if you bump into her in New York, she won't be insulted if you call her Kate. And I would say professionally, something that I haven't shared with many clients is the reason I'm in executive search. If I were not recruiting in the area of marketing and go-to-market, I probably wouldn't be recruiting at all. I was in the business of executive search for a good 3 to 5 years before I discovered go-to-market as a function, as a real joy to me and a passion area. And I never looked back from that point. It is literally what I eat, breathe, and sleep. Recruiting is just what I do to bring it all together with business. So I would say those are two things about me that many don't know.
I love it. Thank you. I actually hadn't heard either of those anecdotes. So great to be learning alongside of our audience. So Kate, as you know, we are here talking to HR leaders, and we're here to talk about executive search. First, how our listeners can vet executive search firms and also how they can effectively assess the candidates themselves. But maybe we can start with the why, which you already kicked us off on. But why is this an important topic to you, and why is it an important topic to our listeners?
Well, I think executive search and process, I'll start with your listeners, if I may. It has to be important first and foremost, just because, I mean, this is such an old term, but it couldn't be more real and front and center than it is today. And that is, the war for talent is real. And if we look at some of the statistics and the quotes that you even mentioned at the top of this conversation from Harvard and others, The Economist names poor hiring as the number one business problem. If we can say that more important than financing, more important than your product is your people, if this is the number one determiner of success, what could be more important than not just your talent, but your leaders? And that's executive search. So I can't imagine something more important, not just to HR professionals, but to CEOs. Number one, for me, I would say it's an important subject to talk about process because, frankly, I think executive search as an industry has a mysterious connotation. There's some mystery surrounding the process in some regard, and there shouldn't be. And I also think that there's also a misconception, in my opinion, that the executive search process should be engineered in such a way that there is a certain playbook every time. And I would just argue that all day. So we can get into that. But
and I can't
that's
wait.
why it's important to me.
Thank you. I find that topics are often clarified by contrast. And so in our prep call, there was something in my heart that was overjoyed when you observed that the term is executive search and not executive fetch, indicating that there is a common misconception or possibly even a group of them. So I would love to dive into what is that common misconception, because it gets at what is the definition of executive search. And I'd also love to hear tangentially how that common misconception shows up in questions that you might get.
Questions that I might get from potential companies that want to conduct executive searches, you mean?
Yes, exactly.
Got it. Okay. So fetch versus search. I think that the best way for me to describe what I mean by that, somewhat tongue in cheek, is conducting a search for an executive is a process and a journey, and it takes a village. And this is not the process that we deploy when we seek to fill a position where there are applicants that come to us and apply. Executive search is most often a process that we launch into the world, much like a marketing campaign or a product launch. And all great marketers and revenue and go-to-market executives and CEOs know that pushing your product or your campaign into the world is not nearly as successful as creating a pull. And that is a great executive search. Fetch is what I do when my husband says, could you go to the grocery store and get coffee, bread, and sugar? That's fetch. We in the executive search profession and those who conduct executive searches in the HR profession know that our target audience is that buyer out there. Our buyer is that great executive that we seek. How do we create a pull to that person, for that person? This is not, just, throw a bunch of information out there and see what sticks. This is got to be a combination of art and science, and it's got to be a village process, not a go get it and let me know when you've got 5 of them and I'll be ready to interview. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I mean by search and fetch. Now, to answer your question about questions. So when I talk to a potential company about conducting a search, I can pretty quickly understand their expectations by listening to those questions. If the questions have to do more with the process than they do with the market, mm-hmm. If those questions have to do with metrics along the way more than they do with results, and if they don't ask questions around things like communication and storytelling and my ability to represent them in the market, how will I determine what the great candidate will be? How will I know? If they're not asking me those questions, it's not that they don't know how to run a great search. It's that I know that I'm going to have to do some work to make sure that we're on the same page and well aligned to conduct this search well together.
It's almost as if there's a common misconception of what's at the core of a good fit, like why a good fit works.
Yeah, that is so a good fit you're referring to not my fit with a client, but with the executive's fit in terms of the placement. Is that what you're referring to? Okay.
Just like
So that fit starts long before the search. That fit starts long before you find the candidate. That fit starts day one with internal alignment inside the company itself. All of the stakeholders involved in that process of hiring, they must be aligned and they must have clarity on what is needed. What are the goals? And then we're going to back into what the right fit is going to be. Then all of that needs to be shared with me. I need to glean that information and make sure that when I have it and it's aligned, that when I go out into the market, I'm not just seeking that great fit, I'm compelling it. I don't want to search, I want to compel. And that is what I mean when I say don't push and fetch. We want to pull, right? I can't tell a really compelling story about what this situation is if all I have is a list of qualifications.
Mm-hmm.
That's a job. Nobody wants a job. Everybody wants a career. And at the executive level, that's all it is. So if I don't really have the whole situation and I don't know the story behind this company and the story behind this moment and the reason why these things are necessary for the go forward for this company, I'm not well equipped to conduct your search, much less fetch anything.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. And I love that there's a mutual qualification going on in that process where you're getting to know clients or potential clients, I should say, and they're getting to understand you.
Absolutely. That's another thing. Fetch suggests the the assumption that the company hands over a list of qualifications and I go off. And 3 weeks later, I present a slate and we make a hire and call it a day. I wish searches were that easy. The reality is, as I said before, in taking a village, I need to know that you're in this with me. I need to know that this is going to be a mutual process, that we're going to, I'm going to present to you executives that you feel are qualified based on what was discussed. But I also will hope that you will trust me to not just show you what you expected to see, but maybe even show you some different ways to skin a cat. At the executive level, we are talking about not whether a person can do the job. We're talking about how. How will they do the job that makes them best qualified for your position? Not just the same position down the street, but your company's role in this executive position. The how is all the difference. And I can't figure out whether or not a person is right for that how if you don't have clarity and alignment internally. And I also need you to trust me that there's probably more than one way to get to that how.
Mm-hmm.
What is the goal of the business in the next 18 to 36 months? What are some priorities for this executive? We can agree on what the qualifiers would likely be in order for this person to achieve those goals. But I also would hope that my client will trust me to present more than just what those people look like. That is great executive search. There's good, and then there's great.
Mm-hmm.
I want to give my clients options.
I love it. One thing that's coming to mind too is as you're speaking, Kate, is how you have articulated the fact that how someone does a job is effectively how they fit a company. And you've also alluded to the process being something that is probably slightly different for different candidates, which indicates to me your focus on the candidate experience. What characterizes a good candidate experience from your standpoint? And then as our listeners think about vetting potential firms to work with, what questions can they ask or other things can they do to understand whether if their potential partner is a firm that's focused on that very artful and unique experience for a candidate?
Yeah, this is such an important subject. I mean, we have to face it. In today's market, the talent out there, they're the buyer. And so they're the ones that are very much in control. They're all getting multiple calls a day. 2021 and 2022 have been the most active hiring years of my career. So when I say war for talent is real, I mean, I was doing executive search in the high 90s. This is as intense, if not more. And so we have to recognize that candidate experience is not just going to better ensure the right hire and a more and a quicker hire. We also have to think about the experience as far as our brand representation. If the candidate doesn't have a good experience, and by the way, there's always more than one of them, right? How many people do I touch on my client's behalf in order to make one placement? Easily 50, usually more. That's 50 data points, 50 brand touch in the market with pretty important executive level people who have power, influence, and networks. So who you work with as an executive search firm should be an extension of you and the brand experience you would want any of your partners, any of your customers, any of your employees to enjoy. So this is why the candidate experience is so imperative. It's not just because we want to be known as the nice company. We want to know and do what we want our brand, our CEO, our CMO would want us to do on the company's behalf out there in the market to the most important commodity, talent, right? So that's why that's important. But to go to your original question, what do I recommend a company ask in order to know whether or not a search firm is thinking about the candidate experience? I would ask questions like, for example, I get all questions all the time. Can I get some of your references, Kate? Can you name 2 or 3 CEOs that I can talk to that you've worked with that would speak to what it's like to work with you? Of course I can. But I don't often get the question, and can I also speak to several candidates? Can I also speak to people that you haven't even placed? Who would speak to what the process is like, to speak to what it was like to work with you? What about when you do talk to my references, did you ask them not just how did the search go, but what was it like? What did candidates say about the process? Did candidates feel like they were communicated to? They understood what was happening? That the conversation that they had with the executive search firm felt completely natural and absolutely aligned with everything they heard once they got involved in the interview process with the company itself. These are some of the things that make for a great process and a great experience for the candidate. Communication regularly and with a lot of very valuable information, things that the candidate doesn't have to be asking all the time. Well, can I get this information? Can I get that information? If I can't answer a lot of questions, I didn't do my due diligence enough up front. So those are I want to be an extension of my client. I don't want to be a vendor to my client.
2 things are coming to mind. One, I feel like your answers there do a very effective job of adding diversity of voice to the executive search process. It's a different kind of diversity, but I love that gives the microphone to many, all involved, should I say. And then additionally, and completely a different topic, but I can tell you're in the marketing and revenue practice based upon some of your word choice, like brand touches. It's so something I'm following.
Guilty. But I will say, thank you for bringing up that word diversity and the voices that sometimes don't receive the microphone in the process, but should have to, frankly. When I conduct a chief marketing officer search, I don't just ask to have a sit down with the CEO or one or two members of the board. I want to do a sit down with the chief revenue officer, with the head of product. I want to talk to the head of HR. I want to talk to anyone that I would consider to be, and who the CMO would consider to be, a major stakeholder.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of whether they're involved in the interview process. To me, if I don't surround sound that person, the hire that we want to make, and get input from every side, I am not doing the search justice, and I'm not going to be able to go to market with the full situation and story. What I learn on those one-on-ones is critical, because I go back to the CEO and I say, before we go to market, you should know that we might not have alignment on this and this. Let's make sure we have that alignment before we go out there and look for that beautiful new person. And so that's an invaluable part of the process. And having all of those villagers in the process, now they're invested too.
Absolutely.
And that's and now they're dedicated to the right hire. They're going to put their time in, because search process, again, I can bring the horse to water, but I can't make it drink if the company doesn't really wrap their arms around that beautiful, talented person and give them their own inputs, their time, and then give me that feedback so I can feed it back. So it does take that village. And that's not my job, it's our job.
Absolutely. So I feel like I'm hearing 3 or 4 guiding principles in what you're saying, Kate, and maybe I can gut check them with you. I'm hearing the importance of alignment and knowing priorities across the entire executive hiring committee, beyond the CEO and board, into product, into HR, into sales and revenue. So that's thing 1. Thing 2 is I hear the importance of a how fit, meaning how someone does their job. Is it a fit for the organization's mode of operating, their values, things along those lines? And then I've also heard a consistent theme of the importance of communication as well. What have I missed?
Bang on everything you said. I think the one thing that we might not have talked about is the importance that I've determined over the years of knowing what you want, but also being open-minded to how that can be achieved. And so what I mean by that is I value a client who's clear on what the goals for the business are and how those goals translate into qualifications and priorities of the winning candidate. I value that. I seek that. I try to guide that conversation if I have to, if it isn't already very clear from the start at the top of the search.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I also hope that my client keeps an open mind. Let know what we want, but open-minded to different ways, as I said earlier, to skin that cat. So in the world of marketing, where I spend most of my time, we can all agree that in this particular CMO search that we're about to launch, it's likely that the right fit will look something like this, X, Y, and Z. And I'm going to do all I can to bring you executives that actually match those things. But again, I hope that you'll trust me to show you other ways too, because there's never enough talent. There's never enough. And Fetch is like, again, that's the grocery store. Fetch is for the grocery store. There is no perfect. There is no ideal on legs. There are just humans on legs. And so we have to do our best to keep an open mind, because the way to get to the goal can be achieved in different ways. So that would be the only other thing. A great search process is clear and yet open-minded.
Thank you. That really is quite helpful. And I can imagine different scenarios where that could be applied quite easily. Maybe we can get into process with obviously the understanding that process is not something that is 100% repeatable across candidates, but what does your process look like? And what are common disruption points where maybe you've brought the horse to water and they don't drink?
So I started to share a bit of our process right out of the gates there. Launching the search for us is not just an intake of qualifications being sought. It is, I'm listening for the story of your company. I'm listening for the story of this need. Frankly, to sum it up in one question, why are we here? Why are we conducting this search? What has happened until now, and what has to happen from now until 36 months from now, right? That will tell us everything we need to know, both qualitative and quantitative. And it'll help me to understand culture and be able to paint a picture about what will fit, not just what will work. So that 360 I was telling you, the surround sound of
Yes.
the position, that's the beginning of the process. Having those stakeholder conversations, writing a position description that doesn't just list qualifications, but is specific on what does success look like? What are the outcomes that need to be, that are measures of success, and by when, and what's the priority? Again, we live in a world of ideals when it comes to position descriptions, but we must write it to know what the goals are, right? Mm-hmm. And then the process from there is let's begin conversations in the market. And that's what they are, conversations. I think we can't forget that the candidate is one of the people in this village. So it's not just myself and all those stakeholders in the client company. It's the candidate pool and the market itself. Let's make sure that we're engaging the market, that market, those terrific, talented people may or may not be interested, but those conversations are valuable if we let them be. So let's learn from them and iterate if necessary. And then let's start to really make sure that a great process will include the client commitment, the company's commitment to cadence and feedback, and a process that communicates with the candidate, not just internally and with the search firm. So those are some of the things about, our process. I do a weekly conversation with my client every week, updating that company on what we've heard, what we've done, and where we are, who we're presenting, who we're not presenting, and why. So that's a commitment that we both have to make. And then finally, I would just say it's got to be things that go astray can happen anywhere. Mm-hmm. And so when I say go astray, I mean the client company doesn't make itself available for interviews, or when they do interview, they take forever to bring feedback to the table. We lose talent because I will tell you that every terrific executive right now, if they're talking to you, they are absolutely talking to somebody else. And if they weren't when you approached them, they will after they start talking to you. And they'll even be thinking about whether or not they should be staying in their own companies. And so you always remember that the company that the executive is currently with is also a possibility. They could just walk away at any time and stay put. So I think that really big opportunities for fall down have to do with lack of communication and commitment between the search firm and the company, and lack of communication and commitment between the company and the candidate. We are always trying to bring greatness together, great executive with a great company. But we all have to be in it together. We have to put it down in writing that we are committed to this process, not to searching, but to finding. Let's commit to the find.
Once your clients get into that interview process, Kate, I imagine there are lots of good questions to ask, but are there a few you have found in your career really unlock whether connection is possible, whether camaraderie and effectiveness is possible, that maybe stand out in your mind?
So questions by whom, for whom? I'm sorry, just if you could give me.
Sure. The questions that your clients would ask candidates, or in the reverse, but I was asking more about the company, the potential employer asking the candidate to assess the fit of that executive for their team?
Well, fit comes in two forms in my mind. One is fit for the outcomes we seek, and fit for the company we are. And by company we are, I'm referring to culture. So all of those questions that uncover the answers to those two buckets, in my mind, start with either how or why. Not typically what, but how or why. Why in the past, I see on your resume that you have done, X, Y, Z. You might be thinking that's probably pretty relevant to what we need to achieve here. Question: how did you do it? How did you achieve that? It's often that we can find parallels between an executive and that which needs to be done in our own companies, but it isn't often that it's an exact thing. Right? You took a company from 50 million to 150 million in 18 months, and you did that exactly the way we need to be done. It needed to be done in our market. It's never going to happen. So there's got to be a leap of faith, right? But the leap of faith becomes more of like a jump instead of a leap if we get under the how. How does this person work? Is that something that's transferable here? Are those learnings that this person has acquired applicable here? So how and why questions on both culture and achievements.
Wonderful. Thank you. Wrapping up, it wouldn't be, and I didn't prep you for this one, it just came to mind. So feel free to punt if you'd like, but this wouldn't be a compensation or a podcast, my open comp, if I didn't ask about compensation and any trends that you see in that category.
Yeah. So again, I'll speak compensation wise. Any major trends? No, nothing wildly different. What I will say, over the last couple of years, we've absolutely seen, when it comes to equity, far more common now for equity to vest on a quarterly or monthly basis. That used to be a big deal. It's not a big deal anymore. In fact, it's only a big deal if you don't do it now. So companies whose stock vests annually on a cliff basis, that is something that you will see as it's not competitive. Another thing is combinations of RSUs, PSUs. I'm seeing interesting combos now, more and more. It's not just, there was a time when it used to be a combination RSUs and options. That's kind of the thing of the past now. Even private companies are starting to offer straight RSUs. And I would say, I don't know if that's really a trend yet, but I have started to see it more and more. I would say also that bonuses seem to be getting bigger. I think it's a general truism that the bigger the company, the bigger the bonus, frankly. And so a VP in a Series B startup is not going to enjoy a 50% bonus. But it's incredibly, now it's like standard for the C-suite to enjoy 60 and 70+% bonuses in large companies.
That's interesting. Well, thank you. Last question. If you could ask our listeners, our HR executive listeners, to remember one thing from this very content-rich podcast, what would it be?
Well, maybe fetch versus search. I recognize that your brand is gold, and brand equals experience. And so if you conduct a search thinking about your target market as a customer instead of a candidate, don't think about your search as just go get it. We have to compel our market to us. Let's create a compelling experience, not go out there and fetch. If you think with that mindset, if you change your mindset to that, I promise you everything we've talked about today and more, it comes easily back into it. And all the things that align: great search partner choices, great candidate choices, involvement from your executive leadership team, cadence communication. It all cascades from a great experience and the process of compelling versus searching.
Well, thank you. That contrast again, perfect way to close us out. Kate, thank you. We're so grateful for your time and your expertise.
I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for asking me, Caitlin.
It's been a pleasure. Win top talent while strengthening runway with OpenComp. Thousands of the world's fastest growing companies use our compensation intelligence platform because it offers the most competitive benchmarks and insights available. To learn more, visit app.opencomp.com/signup.